Welcome back to the GovAI Podcast. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Micah Gaudet, Deputy Chief Manager and Chief Public Safety Officer for the City of Maricopa, Arizona. Micah's been at the forefront of practical AI adoption in local government, and not from the vendor lens, but from the inside the city operations. So if you follow LinkedIn, you've probably seen his publishing extensively on applied AI in government, including work on building resilient systems, practical prompt libraries for public servants. And what makes him unique is that the approach he has to AI is not around the hype, but also around using it as a management tool, running real world experiments inside a city, but also with himself of figuring out different tools, what actually works. So I'm thrilled, and I'm sure our listeners are thrilled. Micah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Noam. Good to be with you and Dustin on here.
I want to kick it off because, again, like I said in the intro, a lot of the posts that we've seen on LinkedIn and the conversations you've got quite a lot of buzz around is taking a tool, whether it's Gemini's new model coming out with the Gemini 3 or Claude, and then testing it out and sharing kind of raw inputs. But as a deputy city manager, where does it show up in your work week? Like, where does it actually take part in your day-to-day work?
You know, it's interesting. I think if you asked me that question 2.5, 3 years ago, I could point to specific things. I could point to generating emails or assisting with the policy review. It's at the point now where it's so integrated that it feels the same as opening Outlook. On my screen right now, like literally right now, I have Google Gemini open. Just because there's so much things I'll go throughout the day. It could be a simple, in a meeting, someone uses a term, like, I don't know what that term means, put that into Gemini, what does that mean? Can I explain to me? It's going that way. Or it could be a full on, like, I want to dive into what our impact fees are and how that's going to impact our public safety teams and what that should look like, and researching what other cities are doing. So it's really just seamless into the day-to-day. It's a part of the ecosystem, so to speak, of our work here.
Yeah, I often describe for my work as kind of a super turbocharged, executive assistant or someone with you, or even chief of staff that's just helping you get through tasks and improving them. But I'm curious, in your leadership role, has it changed the way you think about leading your team within your role?
It helps me double down on what I believe to be effective leadership. And effective leadership, I think, really is about empowering and putting your people first. When I was in the Army for a few years, and when I was promoted to sergeant, one of the lines that a guy gave me was, if something good happens, it's because of your team. If something bad happens, it's all your fault. And that was kind of the mentality. And so having that kind of just embedded into me at a young age of provide for your team and give them the tools that they need to be successful, and trust them, empower them. And so I double down on things like human interaction. We have so much technology, which is great. I can instantly Teams message anyone in the city, but I also have legs, and my legs, thank God, work. And so I walk up and get out of my desk, and I'll go walk over to their office and have that face-to-face interaction. So I think like helping me value more human-to-human communication, more human-to-human interaction, I think is the one thing that AI has really helped me lean on, because that's where you really see the real value there in terms of building team and camaraderie and things like that.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Is that because AI puts an emphasis on removing the human from the loop, if you will, in some of these circumstances? So you feel like it's our last bastion of that human relationship where that interpersonal skills is still required? Or so is it almost a compensation with AI? Or
I don't necessarily know if it's a compensation. I don't know if I've seen anything within the AI that would make me think that it's anti-human or something like that. What I see it more of is when we look at, and this is just broadly speaking, we look at where AI can be used in local government. We talk about efficiency, productivity, and things like that. And to me, where they really have that value, and where the value really, the rubber meets the road, is where that involves and benefits people. And so if I'm thinking, okay, AI can benefit the residents, AI can benefit this, with people, how do I know what people want unless I'm talking to them, unless I'm interacting with them? And the same with my team too, right? If I say, hey, here's a cool tool to use, how do I know it's the right tool unless I actually have conversations in which I can see, not just an email, which at my level, if I send an email out, there's an obligation almost to do what I say, But if I can have that face-to-face conversation, I can see in their face, okay, there's something that either they don't understand it, maybe there's some resistance. If there's resistance, help me understand why that resistance is. If you ask my wife, she can confirm this, but I don't have everything figured out. And so that's something that we're still learning together.
That's a good segue into the tool conversation, because I know you mentioned you've got Gemini open on your computer right now. But I mean, as you think about just the AI sprawl and kind of what's happening, and there's different models that are good at different things, and I mean now it's embedded into everything. What is kind of the Micah AI stack for day-to-day use today?
So I would say I've been using Gemini more recently. I think they're doing some really cool things with it. So I've been kind of playing around with experimenting with it. So Gemini is a go-to. Obviously, chat is a staple as well too. I like Gemini for a lot of the more data-driven queries. If I'm like analyzing something, chat is good if I'm doing like a deep research or want to understand kind of the full topic of stuff and want to get a once of the world kind of thing. I love Perplexity. Perplexity is now my default browser, so I love it for just generating information. Another one I like a lot too, and I get some flack for this, but I think it's super useful, is I'll use Grok, especially when I'm looking at doing some deep research and I want to generate a very long list of sources to follow up on. So I'll do Grok to provide me a list of sources, and then I'll go and cross-reference, look up those different things. That's a super helpful one. I love Notebook. Obviously, it's part of the Gemini, the Google suite. Love Notebook. Love Presentations AI. It just depends on what I'm looking for. And sometimes, too, I'll even go on to Perplexity and just type in what are the newest AI tools that have been released in the last month. And then you just go on there, sign up for free trials, test them out, see what happens, experiment with them in the weekend. And that's, add more to the deck. And, as you add more, things fall off and you come back a month later, and it's kind of an ongoing process there.
Yeah, and also like with Perplexity's computer that they just rolled out, like now it's picking the best model for the best task. So it's kind of fascinating.
Have you played with that yet, Dustin? Have you played with the Perplexity's computer yet?
I have. It's pretty good. I got to say, every night at 11 p.m., I have a bedtime story written from my son where he's like the main character that's like designed with his favorite other characters. It does a pretty good job of like piecing together the model queries. So, but I was looking behind you to see if I could find a Mac Mini running OpenClaw, and I didn't see that in the background there or as a part of the stack.
I am too scared to run OpenClaw right now. I don't know if I trust it quite yet. Part of it is I don't think I'm technically savvy enough to be able to set up like my own virtual computer or something like that where I would feel comfortable doing it. Yeah, but I think the phenomenon is super interesting. I think the phenomenon of OpenClaw is a very interesting social experiment.
I'll tell you, I took, I'm like you, right? Testing tools. And when OpenClaw came out and started getting all the likes and stars on GitHub, I immediately downloaded, tested on a virtual environment. And really, I wanted to see the value. So I even connected it up to different messaging tools to try and see what it can do. And really, there's no new technology that comes from this. It's more just that they brought the integration and connections that OpenAI and Claude and others were a little hesitant to do for security reasons. And you're right. After 10 minutes of seeing it work, I was just scared and said, okay, I gotta delete everything here. I feel out of control because it was starting to run operations autonomously from me. But I guess I would be remiss in my role as kind of CEO of Darwin not to ask you, all of these tools that you're using, how do you think about the risk? And maybe we'll get more in depth on this later, but just the governance around, between Grok and Claude and OpenAI and different tools out there, and especially in a kind of a government role, how do you think about managing the risks that each one of these tools brings about in terms of privacy and cybersecurity and different risk vectors?
First off, I want to say I appreciate the fact that you're clarifying what you mean by risk, because a lot of times we come into the risk conversation, and risk can be anything from I don't like the output because I don't agree with it, for whatever reason, or that kind of thing. And there's something, I think there's a conversation on the ethics of AI. I separate that from the conversation, the risk of AI. Those are two separate conversations. I'll say overall, like for instance, the stuff I do on open source AI platforms, right? Those aren't necessarily embedded. So like we have Microsoft Copilot that's on our own cloud here. I can do some more stuff in that environment. But typically, if I'm using a Gemini or ChatGPT or Perplexity, I'm only putting things in there that can be publicly available, or things that are just so obvious. Like I don't care if the entire world knows that we want to buy fire trucks at some point. We have a city, we buy fire trucks, right? Or I don't care if the world knows that, hey, at some point we want to hire more police officers. That's not a big shock to the system, right? Not a weird thing. I'm not going to put in personal information. I'm not going to put in HIPAA information, law enforcement sensitive information on those open source platforms. So I don't have as much of a fear of the risk and cybersecurity side of things, because the data I'm putting in is already publicly available. You can go on the Google and find it yourself today. You can find it yesterday. It's the same information.
And how do you think about that at scale, like beyond Micah, but in the role of like a city or employees? Because it sounds like your self-governance is well informed.
Mm-hmm.
How do you ensure that at the scale of a city?
I think a good policy is important, right? You need to have some kind of policy structure, but understanding too that policy is not prevention. So just a policy, just a piece of paper. That's all it is. It can't actually prevent anything from happening. And I can't tell you how many times you go through any kind of disciplinary process with someone and you review the policy and the first thing they say is like, oh, I don't remember reading this in the policy, or I forgot the policy existed, right? That happens. We're humans. We don't memorize every single policy, AI included. I think another part of it that is often overlooked in local government is celebrating AI and celebrating the uses of AI. There's many places I talk to where they're like talking to one just last week, a city still banning ChatGPT, and it's a pretty large city in Arizona, the Phoenix metro area.
Oh, that's quite common. Yeah, that's quite common across our customer base. It's not a unique thing. We'll put it that way.
And I think the only thing that does is encourage shadow AI, which goes right against what the whole idea of governance is. I think it can be very difficult for our CIOs and our IT departments to manage the security of AI if everything's just outright banned instead of having conversations about it. And part of the reason for having conversations too and celebrating it is this way people feel comfortable bringing up AI and bringing up their use cases. And then when you see that going off rails, you can have those conversations. It's not going to be a gotcha conversation. It's not going to be a punitive conversation. You can have those just minor course corrections and still in a way that celebrates innovation and celebrates trying new things without banning everything. Because again, just all that does is turns into shadow AI.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the data shows that that's the case. Like the best way to get someone to use an app is to ban it, and then they'll figure out a way to get around it to go use it, or they'll bring their own device in there. I think one thing that's interesting, like in your experimentation kind of view, like how would you advise agencies approach like experimenting and piloting? Because there's one extreme where they ban it and they're afraid of like the changes to the models and they want to figure it all out and have all the safeguards in place. And then there's like the safe kind of experimentation and piloting and those types of things. Like how do you approach that kind of in your world?
I know I'm in a unique position because I work with some really, really talented and high quality people, right? So like, for instance, I get to oversee the police chief and the fire chief and some very, well-respected individuals in our organization. And so for me, like if I can't trust my police chief to look at a ChatGPT output and make, use discernment and use good judgment, I probably have much bigger problems than just that. Thankfully, I have a phenomenal police chief, and so I can trust that person. I can trust him to make good decisions. So part of it just, we have a culture of high trust in our organizations. I think that's a starting point. I recognize that not everyone has that. There are some organizations where that trust is not high, and there's different reasons for why that may or may not be the case. And so I think that's important to kind of have a self-assessment of where you're at with your people and where you're at with your team and why you trust or why you may not trust that team member or those teams, and how to cultivate and build that, I think, is an important conversation. Kind of back to the first part talked about with leadership and talking to people and things like that. So I think that's kind of the first and maybe basic level of that when it comes to experimentation and testing things out in those sandbox environments. Other part of it too is looking at the existing landscape, especially for those who may not have a policy in existence now. Just because you have an AI policy doesn't mean you don't already have some kind of data governance environment. So first off, like, don't build an AI policy from scratch, because you already have an existing environment. So like, scaffold it on top of what's already there, and then see, okay, what are the gaps, and having those conversations. I think this is, again, why doing this in a collaborative environment is so important, because there's going to be things that your IT director sees that you're not going to see. And there's things that you're going to see at the executive level. IT department might look at it and say, oh, it's a terrible security risk, ban it outright. They might not necessarily see the benefits and that risk reward kind of thing when they're looking at a more executive and strategic perspective.
I'm glad you brought up trust, because I think that comes up like not as often. It's like a bullet point on slideware, and like it's mentioned in conference abstracts, but like when you get into the meat of it, it's not often like something that people dig into, because I think there's a lot of different like layers of that, right? Like there's the trust in like model hallucination and output. There's the trust in terms of like how AI will intersect a job and how you're using data. So as you think about like trust, I mean, what advice, or how are you kind of approaching that? I mean, have you had to kind of deal with naysayers that may not trust the output, or that may be fearful of what AI's impact could be on their job? And how do you navigate those kind of in city government, especially in unionized environments too, where that can be a very delicate balancing act?
Yeah, I mean, put it blankly, I think trust is the currency of government. It's the current, especially local government, closest to the people. It's the currency that we deal with. You know, without trust, nothing happens unless there's the trust of the people. And that's both internal and external as well too. Internally specifically, what I look at is, okay, where there's a lack of trust. You mentioned people who are maybe, hesitant to use it. Maybe they're afraid of it for whatever reason. So those who are afraid of it or hesitant, is that lack of trust because of they're not familiar with it? Is it because they've been reading the news and the news tells them, a version of AI to get clicks and headlines? Or is it because they are informed, they've done the research, they understand what this tool is, they understand the left and right implications of it, and they're afraid of it? Most often, those who are fearful of it fall under one of the two categories. I've met maybe one or two people in all my travels and communication people who have done the research, they studied it, and they're still like, no, this is the Antichrist. We got to stay away.
We have a lot of listeners that are AI enthusiasts, obvious. And one of the things that's unique about you is the way you approach your experimentation to these tools. And you rattled off in the beginning a few of the tools that you've interacted with and how you explore them. But walk us through your kind of 2-week experimentation process and how you go through it. And specifically, I'm interested to get into your head in terms of sharing, how does someone in a kind of public role think about evaluating a tool? So there's a lot of even entrepreneurs, founders of companies out there, they're building tools, right? They're selling into government. How do you evaluate an AI tool and say, does this work? Does it provide value for me? Does the features, functionalities that I'm expecting it? What is the process you go through in that experimentation that you've kind of famously documented as well on LinkedIn and other social media?
First off, I would say, for me, I'm coming from this from a non-technical perspective. Like, I'm not a techie. I call it when I do presentations, I call it high tech, low country. So like, I'm not a tech guy. I'm just a lowly deputy city manager. So if I can figure it out, hopefully other people who are much smarter than me can go well beyond where I'm at too. Part of the experimentation process is just understand the program, how it works, how it feels. A lot of it is based, I think, on the UI and user experience is a huge part of the success of AI platforms. I think there are a lot of platforms out there that may be really, really good, but the UI UX is so bad that it just takes, like, you don't want to use it. You don't enjoy using it. So I think the enjoyment of the tool itself is really important. This is where my pet peeves against Copilot compared to a Gemini or something like that is it's not very fun to use. Mm-hmm. The other portion of it too is evaluating of using AI not as a solution in search of a problem, but really understanding what you're trying to accomplish and having a goal that is AI agnostic. So when I look at, for instance, our city's strategic plan, or look at or look at my own personal goals and things like that, or or objectives and things. None of that is tied to AI specifically. And so we look at, okay, here's the goal. Now, what's the best way to meet that goal? And that's where AI comes in, if it's the best way to meet that goal. And so part of it is just, for those who are maybe selling AI products or selling the vendors who are trying to get into the local government space, understand that local government is not here to adopt AI. That's not a stated goal as such. Our goal is to serve our residents. And so how do we do that? How do we serve our residents? And so traditional metrics like productivity or efficiency, while they sound great in theory, that's not always the case. And a good example uses a tool to help process citizen inquiries or citizen requests. While that may help our front desk clerks or things like that, they don't get to go home early at the end of the day because AI has made them more efficient. So really, where is the benefit for them using AI, and why is that better for them? And so kind of taking that next step of who benefits from the AI system, what is the goal there, and then how do I use that time, how to use that resource, that extra productivity, extra efficiency, going back to the trust, to be able to have more trust with people. And so what I love systems that are like, hey, we're going to free up this time with our city, our clerks, because now they can spend more time with the walk-ins. Now they can take more time to devote with people who are walking in, or take more time on that one phone call to explain in more detail what the permitting process is, or what the zoning requirements are for a new business in town or something like that.
I know Dustin has a few questions on mine. I see him coming, but I have to ask you if you have an opinion on this, because I've been fascinated. You talked about trust, and government is a unique type of customer. And we got a great example of this in the federal government with the Pentagon, with Anthropic, where they were putting their own guardrails, speaking of trust and governance. And the Pentagon is saying, no, you don't, we decide the rules on how we should be able to use it within the law and the Constitution. And then OpenAI swooped in, right, and signed the contract recently. What's your take in terms of that intersection of where government or public sector wants to have the authority or the last say versus this clash on how AI gets used?
I don't want to speak to why the federal government decide to do or not do whatever their requirements are, things like that. I think at the local level, so specifically in local government, I think it's extremely important for local governments to be able to set their own set of rules to control their own destiny, so to speak. Because at the end of the day, if there's any type of blowback against it or any type of concern about the AI output, we're the ones that has to defend the system. We're the ones that has to defend the output, right? We're the ones that are going to be called to the carpet, not necessarily the Anthropic, right? So like with Anthropic or things like that, like they can call, they can have a joint session of Congress and call people to that and get subpoenaed to testify before Congress. We can't do that in local government. It doesn't work the same way. And so I think it's even more important for us to be able to set our own rules and to understand what those rules are.
Fascinating.
So I have to evolve the conversation and now into another buzzword or phrase we get a lot in conferences, and that's the agentic side of the house. So just when we wrapped our arms a little bit around the generative AI, human in the loop, human prompting everything, now we start to blur the lines. We start to think about agentic systems that may have a human driving a goal, but that may self-assign future goals, may be used by a constituent to file open records requests. So, I mean, how do you think about agentic AI and all of the craziness that's happening? How are you kind of approaching that? And where do you think we're going to see it first in local government?
Agentic AI, I think is relatively new. It's like only been coined the last year and a half, I think, in terms of when it was really, even the term itself was coined. So it's a very new thing. I think there's a lot of, there's folks who look at just any type of vibe coding as being agentic AI, and then there's ones who are actually running true agents and doing things. I think where we're going to probably see agentic AI first is kind of like you mentioned, Dustin, is it's going to come from residents. And this is one of the reasons why I think if there's ever a reason why local government's going to take AI seriously, I don't really care if your local government uses or doesn't use AI. That's your personal choice. But here's the reality. One day, someone's going to come into your council chambers. They're going to go to your call to public, and they're going to pull out some source from AI, and they're going to say, hey, because of ChatGPT, blah, 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 and you're going to have 2.5 seconds to respond to that. And how do you challenge that? How do you know if it's true or not? What does that mean for your cities?
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily that your city is using AI, but the expectation from your residents is going to be if they're expecting to be able to interact with your data the same way they interact with all other sources of data. We saw the exact same thing with social media. So a similar kind of process there. So I think it's probably where it's going to come from first. Dustin, is going to be that citizen driven side. My hope is that local government is curious enough to do some testing, to do some playing around with it. That way, when it comes through on the citizen side, they have an understanding of how that got there, how to get the information that they need. I think the worst thing that could happen is an agentic AI system generated by a citizen that routes to bad information and bad, not bad, but maybe inaccurate decisions are made. And then you find out about it 5-6 years after the fact. You're trying to undo that entire building permit process. That building now exists. And what do you do now? How do you manage that?
It's an interesting point because I think, the other thing that we think about that AI is kind of ushering in that's driven by citizens is this notion of like no wrong door government access, where like people are coming into government agencies not always through the website anymore. Like I think about when my son wanted to get his driver's license, he used ChatGPT to find out all the forms and everything else. Never fact checked it with the state. He was lucky it got it right. But like, how do you think about kind of optimizing for government service delivery, like in this AI era? Like just when we got social media, like engine optimization, now we've got like the generative AI engine optimization. Is that something that kind of crosses your radar? The city should pay attention to. I mean, it's a balancing act, right? You don't want people to go rogue or be pointed to the wrong information, but it's like, what's the obligation of cities to kind of get it right and to help steer them towards the right information?
Yeah, I think it's a huge obligation for cities to do that. I don't have any, pointers of the best way to do that. I'm still figuring that out on my own, just my own personal side of things. Like, how do I do this? How do I show up in chat and things like that? In fact, I think the last couple of speaking engagements I've had were the result of people finding me in ChatGPT. So which is kind of cool. That's how so doing something there. But I do think it's an obligation. I think it's because, to your point, that's how people are going to be interacting with information now. They're not going necessarily to Google. Even Google itself, you type in something in Google, you get the AI summary right away. So that's how people are going to be interacting with information. And so I think it's extremely important to learn, okay, how do we as a local government get our information out there in such a way that we're getting it's the right thing. And in my city of Maricopa, can't tell me how many times I've had to tell Gemini or ChatGPT, hey, this is the city of Maricopa, not Maricopa County, because it gets confused sometimes. So yeah, but I think it's important. I don't know the best way to do that. I think if there's AI vendors out there, that's something that you might want to figure out how to help us local governments, learn and get ahead of.
But if they want a case study, they can search you.
Yeah. And I'm sure a few of those vendors are listening in. You'll probably get some emails after the podcast airs for this conversation. So let's segue we'll do a rapid fire segment here. So quick question, quick answers. I'll start with this one. What is one experiment that every city should run this quarter, in your opinion?
Use a tool. Don't worry about what the tool is. Just use one. Pick one. Pick your favorite one. Pick it based on color. I don't care. Pick a tool and use it. Just try it.
What is the one area of policy you would say cities should focus in on as it relates to AI?
What to do when the system breaks outside of necessarily human involvement. We focus a lot on the human interaction with it. We don't necessarily focus on what do we do if the system breaks.
All right, I got some on my side. What is one mistake with AI that cities should avoid?
I think the one mistake is not using it.
What is one capability cities should build internally as it relates to AI?
Learning how to read and communicate effectively, I think, is the one skill.
I want to finish us on this question and kind of close this out. If we get this right, AI is clearly this transformative technology. But if we get it right, what fundamentally is going to change about government or the way City of Maricopa operates 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
We probably can't imagine the ways in which it's changing. Because I think it can fundamentally alter, and it should fundamentally alter how local government services are delivered. I hope if we get it right, that means that we are more aware and more responsive to the needs of our citizens.
Amen to that. All right. Well, we could keep going on this conversation, but I want to be mindful of your time. And I think the listeners have a gold mine of information here. So Micah, thank you so much for this conversation.
Well, thank you.
Looking forward to part 2.
Absolutely.